We have like the famous portrait gallery, which is in the portrait room, an official room where ceremonies take place, I'm sure, at least meetings. There are the portraits of all the former rectors of the university, the directors, and they're all old and male and white and probably straight. And then some people find that a little intimidating. Like we don't like to have meetings in that room because they kind of look down upon you. And then to kind of remedy that, there was an initiative where there were portraits taken of all the female professors, but they're out in the hallway and they are in color, much nicer to look at. But still, we felt like there was a partial solution to the problem, but it doesn't really solve anything, I'm sure. So then we did extensively discuss the idea of using an art form to think through these problems, and this is actually what is coming out of it now.
The difference between science and art is that art is already perceived as more subjective in a way, right? So it's the impression of the artist. It's the viewpoint of the artist of the reality, right? So it already has some sort of a subjectivity in it, if I may call it like that.
Just talking about this on camera, even though you know you're being animated, is kind of scary in a way. It's kind of intimidating, and also, who am I to talk about this topic? And I'm not representing anyone here. No one feels like the single person who is capable of covering this discussion. We can definitely not rise above it and have this claim to objectivity that some of us might like to have when it comes to research. Yeah. I would definitely hope by bringing in an artistic sort of discourse to foreground the complexities more and to see it as an ongoing process of something that we try to negotiate at this point in time.
You always have your own position, right? You always bring your own position to the table. And we pretend that we are objective as researchers, but we are not. So this is something that we generally try to to pretend, that we are objective. We tell the truth. And of course, there is some truth, there is some facts, there is data. It's not that science is just an opinion, as a lot of people think recently, but like there is of course some subjectivity of only already on the topics that you investigate and why you pay attention to certain things and not to others, for example, or why you make certain choices in the research process. So this of course happens. And I think, it's very important to look into, like you said, who is talking and about who are you talking.
Sociologists, we call this habitus. It means it's our internal discourse, how we think about things automatically. I have certain opinions, and these opinions are related to my identities. It's because I'm working at a university, I live in a city, I have certain opinions on things. And in order to understand my opinion, you have to link it to my identities.
Things that define you, you're not even aware of it yourself so much. And I think that goes to show that the context in which you're interacting with people plays a big role in that.
Inclusion is a consequence of diversity. So for me, diversity is only the recognition that people have different identities or different personalities. Inclusion is the consequence of that recognition and bringing it into practice. So we can recognize that people are different, but inclusion is then bringing that recognition to practice and ensuring that people have equal opportunities and access to outcomes.
There you already see why inclusion is a lot harder to achieve than diversity. Diversity, you get up to a point. So people often think about it too easily, but up to a point you can say, okay, we need a balance between men and women, and we need a balance between neurodivergent. We need to have representation of neurodivergent people, of non-binary people, of non-Dutch people, etc., etc. But it's not a numbers game, really.
Yeah, so I would say diversity or anyone who's diverse is, someone who has had life experiences which do not align with the majority group in the place wherever they are.
And what we see in research is that the more that we value different cultural identities, for example, the more that youth start to feel like they belong. So basically, if you kind of support them to be who they are, it helps them to create some sense of belonging, and that also helps to achieve more, in terms of grades and school outcomes. And then we ask them about their perspective, basically, because like I said, I think it's a very personal concept. Nobody can judge whether somebody feels belonging except for the person themselves.
I would say first and foremost, it's important to listen to people who have diverse backgrounds, which is, one of the attempts of making this video is just to make sure many different viewpoints and backgrounds are represented. So I think one very important step is making sure there is representation and you are listening to people who have been through these experiences, and they are called minorities for a reason. It's not going to be half of the room who will represent that view, but sometimes there's a tendency that you go with the majority vote because you feel like, okay, that's 70% of my university body, so I'll just make policies for them. But the whole point of diversity and inclusion is to listen to the other 30% or even 20%, 10%, whoever is not represented by the majority. It's important to have their voices heard as well, and making sure there are structural balances in place so that these voices can come out and you can make some decisions based on what they are telling you. So I think this idea of making a safe space for discussions and trying to make it comfortable for everyone to contribute, those sorts of things should come from the majority group for sure. We're all implicated in this discussion. It's not something that you can talk about from a distance. Maybe only if you stick to the numbers and say, this is not a fair representation because I've counted. That's the most objective as it gets, but you're still implicated, whether you want to or not. So, of course, it is also about me working in an institution that is still not fair, in a society that's not fair. No.
If you're in an authoritative position in Dutch academia, you often forget that you're in an authoritative position. You forget that even if you define everything in egalitarian ways, that the person sitting across from you doesn't. Because even if you're not personally scary, it's still an unequal relationship. I sort of grew up in academia as a young white Dutch male, and I think I'd like to think that I got where I am mostly, hopefully, because I was good at what I did. But the fact that I was a man certainly helped, probably. In the usual sense, probably I had a little bit more time to do my research than some of my female colleagues did. Maybe it was also easier for the male supervisors and male, people on job hiring committees to see me rather than my female rivals. All of those things probably happened without me knowing it. And that's not necessarily because those people are sexist or racist or whatever ism you can put on it. But because they're blind spots.
I mean, I think what is key is that you should be aware of certain power dynamics and some level of trustworthiness, in a sense, or that the other can have trust in you or feel safe. And I think this is one of the most important, but also one of the most tricky things to do. So, for example, if we are both white, right? So there's no power dynamic there. But as soon as I would have been from color, for example, and we talk about racial differences or ethnic differences or cultural differences, suddenly there's some power dynamic going on, right? So then you should be very aware of where you come from and where the other is coming from, and also your positions of, as we sometimes call them, power or privilege. Yeah. So especially if you have a position of power or privilege over the other person, it changes the entire dynamic when we talk about these topics, basically.
And sometimes the burden also falls on minority groups to, educate the majority groups. And I guess part of that, we are trying to do through this video. But then I think a circular thing that happens is often this responsibility ends up falling on those who are in the minority group, and they have other problems to deal with. Their day job is not to convince the majority group to take them seriously. But that's how it ends up happening. So I think fundamentally the change should come from the top down, so to speak, and that responsibility of really understanding these challenges that minority groups might face, that responsibility does fall on the authority figures for sure.
We all have diversity in ourselves. It's not a topic of the other. It's always a topic of everyone. And this is also why you say, before you said like it's such a big overarching team basically. But I think, it's always, as if it's something separate, something that we do on the side, but actually it's everywhere.